If you drive far enough into southern Missouri, you'll eventually find a place where the road gets narrower, the trees get taller, and everyone waves, whether they know you or not. That place used to include the town of Briar Hollow, population 1,243, not counting the raccoons who paid no taxes and enjoyed full residency. Founded in the early 1950s, Briar Hollow was built fast, cheap, and with exactly zero attention paid to what lay underneath it. Why? Because the town council at the time said if the ground wasn't solid, God wouldn't have put it there. And it turns out God outsourced Missouri's geology to karst limestone, a rock type famous for caves, sinkholes, and underground rivers and other fun landforms that politely rearrange the surface of the earth without warning. But nobody knew that in the beginning. Back then, Briar Hollow felt steady, peaceful, and just boring enough to be trustworthy. You know, church on Sundays, catfish fry at the VFW on Fridays, and a town motto proudly painted on an old water tower, Briar Hollow, steady as an oak. A motto that, in hindsight, aged like milk. Because beneath the quiet sidewalks, friendly neighbors, and the best pie within 50 miles, lay a sprawling cave system, so wide and unstable it was less a foundation and more a polite suggestion. And the ground under Briar Hollow was about to make its opinion known. The first sign that something was wrong happened on a quiet Monday morning. Harold Stinson walked into his backyard with a cup of coffee and noticed his tool shed was gone. Not damaged, not tilted, not wind blew off the door. Gone. Vanished. Like it had checked out early and forgotten to leave a note. In its place was a perfectly round hole, about 12 feet across and just deep enough to make Harold say the only prayer he'd ever uttered since 1978. His wife blamed teenagers, the sheriff blamed erosion, and the insurance company blamed act of gods, which, in corporate languages, good luck with that. Harold tried to show the town council the hole. They nodded, took some pictures, then confidently recommended the official municipal solution to all geological problems. Fill it with gravel. They even offered to split the cost if Harold wrote the check. To be fair, nobody wanted to admit that the ground might be unstable. It was much easier to pretend the earth had simply hiccuped. Besides, it was just one shed. A shed Harold didn't particularly like anyways. But Briar Hollow didn't realize this was only the beginning, because once a cave system starts collapsing, it doesn't usually stop after one polite warning. The ground was shifting, the cave below them was waking up, and Briar Hollow was about to learn the hard way that foundations matter. After Harold's shed vanished into the polite little crater behind his house, Briar Hollow did what small towns do best. It pretended nothing was wrong. For about 6 weeks. Then the road disappeared. County Road 12, a quiet strip of pavement leading to an old feed mill, woke up one morning looking like someone had taken an ice cream scoop to it. A perfect arc of asphalt sagged downward, the edges cracked like a plate dropped on linoleum. The sheriff called it a minor settling event, which was similar to calling a gunshot a loud misunderstanding. A month later, part of the town's picnic pavilion slid into the earth at a dignified 20-degree angle, like it was bowing out of community service. The local paper ran the headline, "Structural Tiredness Blamed." Then came the drainage ditch, or more accurately, the hole where the drainage ditch used to swear it lived. Kids started daring each other to go stand near it. Parents started pretending they weren't worried. The town council started holding emergency meetings, which they defined as the regular meetings but with more coffee and slightly louder sighing. Residents began joking about the hungry cave, mostly because joking was easier than admitting the truth. Nothing stays perfectly circular by accident. The ground was shifting beneath Briar Hollow. Buildings, roads, and memories were vanishing with the quick efficiency of a bored magician. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't erosion. This was the earth making a slow, deliberate correction. And the town still had no idea how deep the problem went. Literally. By the spring of 1956, Briar Hollow had developed a kind of collective shrug towards disappearing infrastructure. Sheds vanished? Nah, it's kids messing around. Road caves in? Heavy rain. Half the pavilion slides into the earth like it's clocking out early? Yeah, termites probably. But eventually the state took notice, mostly because the county kept filing repair requests that read like punchlines. A road fell into a hole again. So, the Department of Natural Resources sent down a geologist named Dr. Edwin Mallory, a man who had the patience of a saint and the perpetual expression of someone who expected the ground to betray him at any moment. Mallory spent 2 full days surveying the area. He tapped rocks, measured soil density, studied topography, and looked increasingly horrified. By day 3, he presented his findings to the town council, a group of men who wore suspenders unironically and did not appreciate surprises. Mallory's conclusion was polite, scientific, and very, very clear. Your town is sitting on a multi-chamber karst cave system with active subsidence. Several chambers are large enough to destabilize entire blocks. Evacuation is recommended. The council listened carefully, nodded respectfully, and then placed the report in a drawer labeled, "Maybe later." One member reportedly said, "People in this town have been standing on this ground for decades. If it were dangerous, it would have said something by now." The ground had been saying something. In fact, it was about to speak much louder. Because Mallory hadn't just confirmed the town was unstable, he confirmed Briar Hollow was sitting on top of a geological time bomb, and the countdown had already started. In the early hours of April 3, 1957, Briar Hollow woke to the kind of a thunderous rumble usually reserved for freight trains and bad decisions. Windows rattled, dogs barked. Several residents claimed their house shimmied, which, for a town built in the 50s, was generally not part of the floor plan. When dawn arrived, so did the truth. Right in the center of town, between the hardware store, the post office, and the beloved diner that served coffee strong enough to dissolve regret, a massive sinkhole had opened like a dropped elevator. The post office hadn't vanished completely, but it was leaning at an angle that suggested it was trying to read its own mail. Half the diner had dropped several feet, trapping the morning shift inside until the fire department arrived with ladders and a sense of defeated familiarity. The hardware store didn't fall in, but its parking lot did, taking 2 tractors, a delivery truck, and a very surprised goat. For one glorious week, Briar Hollow became the punchline in every geology lecture from Kansas to Maine. The town council, desperate to regain control, issued an official statement calling the event a minor geological inconvenience. Dr. Mallory, who had warned them repeatedly, returned to town long enough to say, "I told you so," in the scientifically approved tone of someone who absolutely meant it. It was clear now this wasn't a fluke, or a bad patch of soil, or the world's most aggressive gopher. Briar Hollow was sinking, and it wasn't done. After the center of town dropped several feet overnight, you'd think Briar Hollow would immediately evacuate. You'd think wrong. Residents insisted the collapse was localized. The town council insisted everything was structurally optimistic. Even the fire department shrugged and said, "Well, it hasn't fallen again yet." Unfortunately for everyone involved, the federal government had eyes, ears, and more importantly, liability concerns. Within a week, FEMA inspectors arrived, wearing matching jackets, carrying clipboards, and looking around like they'd stumbled into the world's slowest apocalypse. They poked cracked sidewalks, studied the tilted buildings, and quietly asked one another if gravity worked differently in this county. Then, in the most predictable twist imaginable, they recommended a full evacuation. The town's response was complicated. Some residents refused to leave, insisting that the ground had never given them trouble before, as if the diner's back half wasn't currently 6 feet below street level. Others demanded the government fix the caves immediately, like you could just patch a subterranean void the same way you'd fix a leaky roof. Insurance companies, smelling disaster the way sharks smell blood, pulled out of the region entirely, leaving homeowners with policies that technically existed but spiritually did not. By month's end, temporary camps popped up outside town. Families packed their belongings, pets were rounded up. One man chained himself to a telephone pole in protest, though the pole itself tilted 3 hours later, forcing him to reconsider his stance on geological inevitability. Even the raccoons abandoned the area, which for Briar Hollow was the clearest warning sign of all. The evacuation had begun, messy and reluctant, but the town wasn't done sinking yet. By the fall of 1957, Briar Hollow had become two things simultaneously: a federal cautionary tale and a prime destination for people who enjoyed ignoring cautionary tales. With most residents evacuated, the remaining buildings didn't waste time giving up. The old general store slumped backwards like it was exhaling after a long shift. The schoolhouse developed a diagonal personality, leaning so far to the left it became a political metaphor. The barber shop didn't fall into a hole. It simply slid for about 4 feet downhill, as if it was trying to find better customers. Geologists noted that the cave system beneath the town was expanding, dissolving, and collapsing in slow, uneven intervals. Locals noticed that it was getting harder to find level ground to barbecue on. Documentary crews arrived next, eager to film the world's largest forgotten American tragedy. They interviewed the remaining holdouts, those who insisted the town was perfectly safe as long as you stayed on the good patches, which, unhelpfully, were never clearly defined. By early winter, Briar Hollow looked less like a town and more like a set of buildings politely rearranging themselves. Some sank, some tilted, some simply cracked from the stress. The ground wasn't devouring the town out of malice. It was just tired of holding it up. And there was still one final collapse to go. By the spring of 1958, Briar Hollow was empty. Not officially, the census still listed a handful of stubborn residents, but the ground had already made the final decision. Grass crept over the cracked sidewalks. Morning fog pooled in low spots that didn't exist the year before. What remained of the diner's sign leaned in a delicate angle, pointing toward nothing in particular, though. Nature wasn't reclaiming the town so much as calmly repossessing it. Dr. Mallory returned one last time to survey the damage. He stood on what used to be Main Street, notebook in hand, staring out at the landscape that looked less like a disaster and more like a place gently dissolving back into the earth. He said the collapse would continue for decades, slow, quiet, predictable in its unpredictability. The town built on hollow ground will always go home the same way, downward. Briar Hollow's buildings didn't disappear all at once. They simply sagged, slumped, and folded into the soil year by year, until only foundations and crooked timbers remained. Today the site is fenced off and known by a new name on state maps: Briar Hollow Geological Hazard Area. Locals just call it the cave that swallowed the town. Now, you won't find a marker, and you won't see a monument. But if you stand there at dawn, you can hear the water dripping into limestone caverns below. Patient and quiet, still carving away what's left. This is Truth-ish, where things are mostly true and always strange. Thanks for watching.